Chapter 1. Isabella Montgomery opened her eyes to a world that was both familiar and completely foreign. The soft fabric of the sheets beneath her felt different, far too luxurious for the life she once had. She sat up, her head spinning, as she tried to make sense of the situation. The room she was in was massive, the walls lined with expensive artwork, the furniture sleek and modern, clearly a place of wealth and privilege. But none of it was hers, not in the life she remembered. Panic set in. Her hands reached out to steady herself as she glanced around the room, noting the unfamiliar details: a glass desk, a massive window with a view of the city skyline, and an array of personal items that seemed too polished, too deliberate. She felt the weight of her new identity pressing down on her. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her room. And yet, she recognized it. The body she occupied was hers, but not hers. She looked down at her hands, soft, delicate, the nails manicured perfectly. It wasn't the worn skin of someone who spent years fighting for survival, but the hands of someone who had everything given to them. And then it hit her. She had been reborn. In the same city, the same world, but in the body of another Isabella Montgomery. A different life. A second chance. The memories that flooded her mind were jumbled at first, but as they slowly came together, they told the story of a woman who was both familiar and strange. This Isabella was the heir to the Montgomery Empire: wealth, power, connections, things Isabella had never had before. Her new life was a stark contrast to the one she had fought so hard to build in her past existence. The woman she now inhabited was someone who didn't need to struggle. She was already at the top. But Isabella wasn't here to live out the life of luxury. No, she had unfinished business. The Leclerc family, the people who had orchestrated her downfall, were still out there, and they were still powerful. The betrayal from her previous life echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. The Leclercs. They had taken everything from her: her reputation, her career, her freedom. They framed her for a crime she didn't commit, ruining her life in a way that left no room for redemption. But in this new life, Isabella had power. She had the resources to bring them to their knees. And this time, there would be no mercy. A burning fire ignited in her chest as she stood up and moved to the large window. The city stretched out before her, a sprawling metropolis filled with opportunity. But all she could think about was revenge, the sweet, sweet taste of it. She had been wronged, and now she had the chance to make them all pay. But first, she needed to understand who this new Isabella was. Who was she in this life? What were her relationships, her alliances, her enemies? And most importantly, how could she use this knowledge to bring down the Leclercs? She had to learn everything, every detail about her new life. And she would do it quickly, because every second was one step closer to avenging the life she had lost. Her new identity was her greatest weapon. She could play the game now. She could be the one who held the power. But she needed patience. Isabella had learned long ago that revenge was best served cold. And this time, she was going to take it all. As she looked out over the city, the weight of her new reality settled in. She had been given a second chance. And this time, she wasn't going to waste it. The Leclercs wouldn't know what hit them. Chapter 2. Isabella couldn't afford to waste any more time. The world she had been reborn into was filled with possibilities. Doors that were once closed to her now swung wide open. But the first thing she needed to do was understand the layout of this new life she had inherited. She needed information, and she needed it fast. The Leclerc family was still at the top of the food chain, their reach far and wide, but Isabella's position gave her the perfect vantage point to destroy them. Her first order of business was learning everything she could about her new self. Who was this Isabella Montgomery, and how had she gotten here? A quick scan of the room revealed a sleek laptop sitting on the glass desk beside the window, a soft glow emanating from the screen. She moved toward it, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The password to the laptop was her name, obviously, and she quickly entered it, gaining access to her personal files. Emails, financial statements, social schedules, and business correspondence filled the screen. It was a lot to sift through, but she knew exactly where to start. Isabella Montgomery, the woman she had been reborn as, was the heir to one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. The company she now controlled was worth billions, with influence stretching across sectors from healthcare to telecommunications. It wasn't just wealth, this Isabella Montgomery had power. And that power could be wielded against the Leclercs. As she dug deeper into the company's operations, she began to notice something odd, an increase in financial transactions related to a mysterious investor, Leclerc Industries. The same Leclerc family that had ruined her life in her previous incarnation had ties to the very company she now controlled. It was no coincidence. They had been manipulating her from the shadows long before she had ever realized it. Their influence ran deep, and it was far more extensive than she had imagined. A surge of anger washed over her, but she reined it in. Now was not the time for emotion. She needed to be strategic, meticulous. The first thing she needed to do was figure out exactly how they were connected to her new life. If she could expose their financial dealings, perhaps she could begin to break their hold on the company, and by extension, on her, but she couldn't do this alone. The woman she had become had a network of employees, friends, and allies at her disposal, and Isabella was quick to realize that she could use them to her advantage. She would need someone on the inside, someone who could help her navigate the labyrinth of corporate espionage that had tied the Leclercs to her company. If on cue, her phone buzzed. A message from her personal assistant, Claire, flashed on the screen. "Miss Montgomery, your meeting with Mr. Hayes has been rescheduled to 3 p.m. today. He's bringing some documents regarding the upcoming merger." Isabella frowned. She had no memory of a Mr. Hayes and didn't remember any scheduled meetings, but she recognized the name of the company he represented. Hayes Industries was a mid-level competitor in the tech industry, though not one she had particularly concerned herself with before. It was likely an innocuous meeting, but Isabella could feel the pieces falling into place. The Leclercs often manipulated smaller companies through mergers and acquisitions, taking advantage of those they deemed weak. It was their way of controlling the market, slowly, carefully, and from the shadows. She could feel the tension building inside her. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about taking back control of her life, her legacy, and dismantling the system that had been stacked against her. She couldn't afford to be reckless. She needed allies, and she needed information. It was time to make her move. Isabella stood up from the desk, the resolve in her posture evident. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was Claire. "Miss Montgomery, I just received a confidential report on the merger. Would you like to review it before the meeting?" Claire asked, her voice cautious but professional. Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Send it to me immediately. I want every detail on my desk by the time I walk into that meeting." She hung up the phone, her mind racing. Every step she took from here on out had to be calculated. She would need to meet Mr. Hayes and evaluate how he fit into the larger picture. But Isabella wasn't going into this blindly. She would gather every shred of information, every whisper, every document, until she could piece together the full extent of the Leclerc's web, and when she did, they wouldn't know what hit them. Isabella quickly dressed, her confidence growing with each passing minute. She had a plan. She had a purpose. And now, she was going to find out how deep the Leclerc's grip on her life truly went. Chapter 3: The meeting with Mr. Hayes was uneventful, at least on the surface. He was a tall, sharp-dressed man in his mid-40s, his demeanor professional yet unremarkable. The conversation revolved around the upcoming merger between Montgomery Technologies and Hayes Industries, with Hayes pushing for more favorable terms for his side. But Isabella wasn't interested in the business details. She was interested in something else entirely. She studied him carefully, watching his every move, reading the subtle signs in his body language. There was something about Hayes that didn't sit right with her. His overly rehearsed smile, the way his eyes darted around the room when she asked pointed questions, it was as if he was hiding something. As the meeting progressed, Isabella's suspicions deepened. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a player in a much larger game. And if she was going to dismantle the Leclerc family's empire, she would need to figure out exactly where Hayes fit into the puzzle. Before the meeting ended, Isabella subtly shifted the conversation toward his ties with the Leclercs. She asked casual questions, pretending to be interested in his thoughts on their long-standing relationship. Hayes stumbled over his words, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face before he regained composure. Isabella noted every reaction, every hesitation. The Leclerc's influence was more pervasive than she had realized, but she now had the first piece of the puzzle. Hayes was involved with them in some capacity, and it was only a matter of time before she uncovered the full extent of his role. As the meeting concluded, Isabella made her exit with a polite handshake, but her mind was already racing. She couldn't afford to waste time. She needed to dig deeper, to find allies who could help her navigate the treacherous waters of corporate betrayal. The Leclercs had their fingers in every pie, and if she was going to bring them down, she couldn't do it alone. Back at her office, Isabella opened her laptop and began to search for anyone who might be able to offer information. She reached out to a few trusted sources within the company, including an old associate, Victor Sullivan. Victor had worked as a senior analyst at Montgomery Technologies before she died in her past life, and though he had since left the company, he was still well connected in the industry. If there was anyone who could give her insight into the Leclerc family's influence, it was Victor. She composed a quick message. "Victor, I need your help with something sensitive. It's important. Please meet me at the usual place tonight after hours." Isabella. Victor had always been a no-nonsense type, and she knew he wouldn't hesitate to meet her when it came to business, no matter how unusual the request. As she hit send, she felt a surge of anticipation. If anyone could help her uncover the depths of the Leclerc family's manipulation, it was Victor. Later that evening, Isabella made her way to a dimly lit bar on the edge of the city, a place where secrets were exchanged and deals were struck under the cover of darkness. She arrived early, claiming a corner booth with her back to the wall, and ordered a drink. The weight of the mission ahead pressed on her, but she focused on the task at hand. One step at a time, Victor arrived right on time, his broad frame filling the doorway as he entered. His sharp eyes immediately found her, and with a quick nod, he made his way over to the booth. Isabella studied him as he slid into the seat across from her. He hadn't changed much, still the same rugged, no-frills demeanor, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "What's this about, Montgomery?" he asked, his voice low, his gaze cautious. "I need information," Isabella replied, leaning forward slightly. "I need to know everything about the Leclercs, their financial dealings, their influence, their connections to Montgomery Technologies. I don't care how you get it, but I need it." Victor raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. He studied her for a moment, clearly processing her words. Finally, he nodded. "You know I don't play games," he said gruffly. "But if you're serious about this, you'll need to dig into their operations the way they do. And that means going deeper than you've ever gone before. You'll need someone on the inside, someone who's close enough to them to get the information you need. I can help, but it won't be easy. There are layers to the Leclerc family that you won't believe." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Then help me peel back those layers." Victor exhaled sharply, his eyes flicking toward the entrance of the bar as if expecting someone to appear. When he was sure they were alone, he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone I know," he said slowly. "A former Leclerc employee, now working under the radar. She's an insider, and she's pissed at the Leclercs for what they did to her. She's the kind of person who could help you bring them down. But getting to her won't be easy. She doesn't trust anyone, and the Leclercs have eyes everywhere." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. This was the break she had been waiting for. If she could find this insider, it could be the key to uncovering everything the Leclercs had buried. "Where do I find her?" Isabella asked, her tone steady. Victor hesitated for a moment, then slid a small piece of paper across the table. On it was an address. "She's been laying low. You go there tomorrow, you might get lucky. But don't expect her to roll over. She'll want to see if you're serious." Isabella took the paper, her resolve hardening. This was it. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and she was closer than ever to getting the information she needed to take down the Leclercs. She stood up, ready to leave, but then paused. "Thanks, Victor. I won't forget this." He nodded curtly, watching her leave without a word. As Isabella stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the next move settled over her. The game had begun, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 4. The next day, Isabella stood outside an unassuming building in the heart of the city. The address Victor had given her led her to a place that was the epitome of ordinary, an aging office block tucked away between a cafe and a hardware store. There was nothing remarkable about the location, and that was exactly why it was perfect. The Leclerc family, for all their wealth and power, often underestimated the people who could hide in plain sight. Isabella knew this was where the game would truly begin. She took a deep breath and adjusted her blazer, her fingers brushing over the small weapon tucked in her belt. It was nothing more than a precaution, but in her line of work, it helped her feel a little more secure. She was about to walk into unknown territory, and every instinct told her to be prepared. Inside, the building was dimly lit, with long corridors lined with gray doors and faded signage. The atmosphere felt stale, almost forgotten, and as she walked down the narrow hall, Isabella couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet tension. This wasn't a place where people came to talk about business deals or power plays. It was a place where secrets were hidden in plain sight. Isabella found the door marked S. Crow, consultant, and paused for a moment. The name meant nothing to her, but it wasn't the name that mattered. It was the person behind it. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing for certain: she needed this insider's help. Without it, her plans to bring down the Leclercs would crumble before they even started. She knocked twice, the sound echoing down the hallway. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her late 20s with dark, piercing eyes and a sharp expression. She was dressed in casual clothes, nothing fancy, but the way she carried herself exuded confidence and perhaps a bit of wariness. "You Isabella Montgomery?" the woman asked, her voice cold but not unfriendly. Isabella nodded. "Yes, I'm here to talk about business." The woman studied her for a moment, her gaze assessing and calculating. Then, with a curt nod, she stepped aside and motioned for Isabella to enter. The office was small and sparse, with a desk piled high with papers and files, a few chairs, and a single window overlooking the street below. It felt almost claustrophobic, but the woman seemed at ease, her sharp eyes never leaving Isabella as she closed the door behind her. "Take a seat," the woman said, her tone less inviting than it was businesslike. Isabella sat down, her posture straight and her demeanor confident. She didn't come here to play games. She came here to get what she needed. "I'm Sloane Crow," the woman introduced herself, her voice now softer but still guarded. "I know why you're here. Victor told me you were looking for information about the Leclercs. But I'm going to warn you, this isn't something you just walk into. If you want my help, you'll have to prove you're serious. The Leclercs are dangerous, and anyone who crosses them doesn't walk away unscathed. What makes you think you can bring them down?" Isabella didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. People who thought they knew the danger the Leclercs posed, but had never been in the trenches. She had been in the trenches. She had been destroyed by them. She wasn't afraid anymore. "I know the risks," Isabella said firmly, her eyes locking with Sloane's. "I've been burned by the Leclercs before. They ruined my life. They framed me for a crime I didn't commit, and I lost everything. But I've been given a second chance. And now it's their turn." Sloane's expression didn't change, but Isabella saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She understood. She'd been through something, too. "Why should I trust you?" Sloane asked, her gaze unwavering. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her voice low but steady. "Because I'm going to do what no one else has the guts to do. I'm going to take them down piece by piece. I have the resources, the power, and the will to make them pay. And I'll do whatever it takes to get the information I need to destroy them." Sloane's silence lingered for a moment, the weight of Isabella's words hanging in the air. Then, finally, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll help you. But understand this, the Leclercs don't just play dirty. They play for keeps. They've buried secrets so deep that even their closest allies don't know the full extent of what they're capable of. But if you want to dig them up, I'll be your guide. But you better be prepared for what's coming. Once we start this, there's no turning back." Isabella's heart raced, but she remained calm, her face an unreadable mask. She had already made the decision. There was no going back now. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice low and determined. "Let's bring them down." Sloane studied her for a moment, then stood and walked over to a filing cabinet. She pulled out a thick manila folder and set it on the desk in front of Isabella. "This is a start," she said, her voice colder now, as if preparing Isabella for the brutal truth. "It's a record of every illegal transaction, every shady deal, every backdoor agreement the Leclercs have made over the years. It's all in here. But it's only the tip of the iceberg. If you want to take them down, you need to be ready to go deeper than you ever have before." Isabella opened the folder, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. The names, the dates, the amounts, it was everything she needed. This was just the beginning. With Sloane's help, the Leclerc's empire was going to crumble. She closed the folder, her eyes meeting Sloane's once more. "Thank you. You won't regret this." Sloane didn't respond immediately, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, recognition, maybe even respect. Then she simply said, "We'll see." Isabella stood up, her mind already racing through her next moves. The pieces were finally coming together. With Sloane's help and the information she now had, she would be unstoppable. She left the office, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. The war had just begun, and she was ready to fight. Chapter 5. Isabella spent the next few days buried in the documents Sloane had provided her. It was a treasure trove of information, details about shady dealings, bribes, offshore accounts, and more. Each page revealed a new layer of corruption that had been carefully hidden for years. The Leclerc family's empire was built on a foundation of lies, and every lie they had told was documented here. But the more she read, the more Isabella realized that she wasn't just dealing with a few corrupt individuals. The Leclerc family was more insidious, more dangerous than she had ever imagined. It was a Friday afternoon when Isabella decided to take the next step. She had been carefully studying the structure of Leclerc Industries, an international conglomerate with fingers in everything from media to politics, and she needed to figure out exactly where to strike first. The goal was to hit them where it hurt most: their money, their influence, and their reputation. She stood before her sleek, glass-top desk in the executive suite of Montgomery Technologies. The city skyline stretched out before her like an endless sea of opportunity. Isabella's hands were steady as she navigated through files and digital records on her laptop, connecting the dots. The Leclercs had invested heavily in a media conglomerate, one that had been used as a vehicle to manipulate public perception. That was where she would begin, but she wasn't foolish enough to go after the media empire directly. Instead, she would use it against them, play their game by their rules. To bring down the Leclercs, she would need to manipulate the narrative, create a scandal so public, so undeniable, that even their wealth and influence wouldn't be able to protect them. As the sun began to set, Isabella called Sloane, who had agreed to assist her in whatever capacity she needed. They had forged an unspoken partnership over the past week, each helping the other navigate the labyrinth of corporate deception. "Sloane," Isabella said as the phone rang, "I need you to do some digging. I've found a connection between the Leclercs and a media company called Silver Sky Networks. They're more than just investors, they're controlling the narrative, shaping public opinion in ways that benefit the Leclercs directly. I need everything you can find on their operations and any illegal practices they may be involved in." There was a pause on the other end, followed by Sloane's voice, calm and matter-of-fact. "I've got a contact at Silver Sky. I can get inside their systems, see what's really going on. But it'll take time. This isn't small fry stuff, Isabella. We're talking about manipulating news, pushing agendas, influencing elections. They've got people in every pocket." Isabella's expression hardened. "Time is something we don't have. The longer we wait, the more they'll bury. I'll make sure you've got everything you need. Just get it done." Sloane's response was succinct. "I'll handle it." As the call ended, Isabella's mind worked in overdrive. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about exposing the rot at the heart of a system that had been built on manipulation and deceit. She would take everything they held dear and turn it against them. that evening, as Isabella sat in her office reflecting on her next moves, her phone buzzed again. It was an encrypted message from Victor. "Meet me at the usual place. Something's come up. You need to hear this." Her pulse quickened. She had been so focused on her work with Sloan and the media company that she hadn't checked in with Victor in a few days. Whatever it wasn't good. But she wasn't going to let fear get in the way. She dressed quickly, grabbed her coat, and headed out into the night. The usual place was a discreet bar located on the edge of the city, a place where Victor had always met her in the past. The low-lit atmosphere was familiar, comforting in its way. She walked in, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and immediately spotted Victor in the back booth, his large frame hunched over a table as if he was trying to hide something. Isabella slid into the seat across from him without a word, her eyes scanning his face. There was no joking, no sarcastic remarks. Victor was serious. His brows were furrowed, and his hands were tense as they gripped the edge of the table. "You've got news," Isabella said flatly, cutting to the chase. Victor nodded, leaning forward. "It's bad. The Leclercs know we're onto them. They've been watching you, watching us. They've got eyes on every move you make. But there's more. I found something bigger. They're planning something massive. A deal that could solidify their control over the entire tech industry. If it goes through, they'll have power over every major company in the world." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of deal?" Victor hesitated before answering. "It's a merger, but not just any merger. They're teaming up with some of the largest government defense contractors in the world. They're securing a multi-billion-dollar contract, and once that deal goes through, they'll have access to military tech, surveillance systems, the kind of power that could destabilize entire governments." Isabella felt the weight of the words. This wasn't just a corporate power grab. This was about global control, and if the Leclercs succeeded, they would be untouchable. "Where are they in the process?" she asked, her voice cold and calculating. "They're in the final stages." "It's happening in a few days," Victor replied. "I tried to dig deeper, but they've got everything locked down tight. Whoever's behind this deal is untouchable. They've got high-ranking officials involved. This isn't just corporate greed. This is political power on a scale you can't imagine." Isabella clenched her fists beneath the table, her mind racing. "We don't have much time then. We need to stop this deal from happening, and we need to expose everything before they seal their fate." Victor's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw something unspoken in his gaze. It was a silent agreement, an understanding that they were now in this together, and the stakes had just gotten much, much higher. "We'll bring them down," Isabella said, her voice a whisper of determination. "But we need to be smarter, faster. Every move we make from here on out will be under the microscope. We can't afford a single mistake." Victor nodded, his resolve matching hers. "Then we start by hitting them where it hurts most, before they even know we're coming." Isabella stood up, the gravity of the situation settling on her shoulders. The Leclercs had underestimated her before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. She was going to make them pay for everything. And she wasn't going to stop until they were nothing but a memory. Chapter 6. Isabella sat in her car, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she stared at the looming silhouette of the Leclerc family headquarters in the distance. The building stood like a fortress, gleaming under the streetlights, its sharp lines cutting through the dark sky. It was hard to believe that this cold, imposing structure represented the very people who had taken everything from her. But now, it was the heart of their operation, and she was about to strike at the very core of their empire. She had spent the last few days gathering every bit of information she could. Victor had sent her the details on the deal the Leclercs were about to close, and what she had uncovered only confirmed her worst fears. The merger wasn't just an ordinary business transaction, it was a coup. The Leclercs were consolidating their power in a way that would make them untouchable. If the deal went through, they would have control over the defense sector, tech giants, and even entire governments. It was a masterstroke of power, and it was happening in less than 72 hours. Isabella's hands gripped the steering wheel as she took a deep breath. The clock was ticking. She needed to act quickly, but carefully. The stakes were higher than ever, and she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She had learned long ago that patience and precision were her greatest weapons. Now, she would need both. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Sloane. Got into Silver Sky's system. They're hiding something big. I'll need you to meet me. We need to talk. Isabella didn't hesitate. The timing was too perfect. If Silver Sky was involved in the deal as heavily as she suspected, they might be the leverage she needed to bring the whole operation crashing down. She punched the address into her GPS and drove towards their meeting spot, an old cafe on the outskirts of town where she and Sloane often exchanged information. Sloane was already sitting at their usual table when Isabella arrived. She looked up as Isabella slid into the seat across from her, her eyes sharp and focused. There was no small talk. Both women knew the gravity of the situation. I got in, Sloane said, her voice low and serious. The files are encrypted, but I've been able to decrypt a few things. This isn't just about the merger. There's something else they're planning. Something bigger. Isabella leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. What is it? Sloane slid a folder across the table. This. She tapped the file. The Leclercs have been investing in private military contractors. Off-the-books operations. And they've been laundering money through Silver Sky. The deal with the defense contractors is just a front. What they really want is access to classified government technology. And they've already got the green light. Isabella's mind raced as she absorbed the information. This was more than just corporate greed. This was a direct threat to national security, and the Leclercs were playing a dangerous game. They were no longer just a powerful family. They were becoming a shadow government. How much time do we have? Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not much, Sloane replied. They're pushing the deal through in 3 days. But if we expose this, if we get the right information to the public, it could be enough to halt the deal. It could destroy their credibility overnight. Isabella's eyes narrowed. We need to move fast. But we can't be sloppy. If we go public too soon, they'll bury us. We need proof, something concrete that no one can ignore. Sloane nodded. I've got a contact in the media who can help us get the story out. But we'll need more than just a few files. We need hard evidence, something that ties the Leclercs directly to the military contractors. Something that no one can dispute. Isabella's mind worked quickly, forming a plan. There's a gala at Leclerc Industries in 2 days. It's an exclusive event with all their major players in attendance. That's when we'll strike. Sloane raised an eyebrow. A gala? How are we supposed to get in there? It's a high-security event. Isabella smiled, a cold, calculating look in her eyes. I've got an invitation, and I have a few tricks up my sleeve. This isn't just about exposing the Leclercs, it's about making sure they're humiliated in front of the entire city. The gala will be the perfect place to drop the bombshell. The night of the gala arrived, and Isabella was ready. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in her penthouse apartment, the dark green evening gown hugging her figure just right. Her hair was pulled back into an elegant updo, and her makeup was flawless, designed to make her look every bit the sophisticated businesswoman she once was. On the surface, she was the picture of grace and poise, but underneath, she was a woman on a mission. The invitation in her hand was the key to everything. She had been invited as a guest of honor, a nod to her family's legacy in the business world. The Leclercs had always been aware of the Montgomerys, but they had never seen her as a threat. That was about to change. Isabella arrived at Leclerc Industries. The red carpet rolled out for the elite of the city. The building was buzzing with excitement, the who's who of the corporate world mingling in the grand foyer. But Isabella's focus was singular. She wasn't here to socialize. She was here to tear down the Leclerc empire, one piece at a time. She walked into the ballroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The crowd was thick, but Isabella's eyes were sharp. She was looking for her targets, people who could be persuaded to talk, people who had ties to the shady dealings the Leclercs were involved in. She wasn't just a guest, she was a predator, and the people around her were her prey. After mingling for a while, Isabella finally spotted her first target, Thomas Leclerc, the oldest son of the family. He was surrounded by business partners and high-profile guests, but Isabella knew this was her moment. She approached him, her steps confident, her expression cool. "Mr. Leclerc," she said, her voice sweet but firm. "It's been a long time." Thomas turned to face her, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized her. "Isabella Montgomery," he said with a smirk. "What a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," Isabella replied, her gaze never leaving his. "But I suppose when you've got power like yours, you tend to get noticed." Thomas chuckled, clearly thinking she was trying to flatter him. But Isabella had other plans. As they exchanged pleasantries, she casually dropped a few lines of carefully chosen information. Little things about their financial dealings, his connections to the military contractors. The Leclercs were always careful about what they said in public, but they had no idea that Isabella had been keeping a very close eye on them. As she spoke, she watched Thomas's eyes flicker with nervousness. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, but he had no idea just how dangerous. Before they could get deeper into conversation, a voice interrupted them. "Thomas, darling, who is this?" Isabella turned to face the voice. It was Victoria Leclerc, the matriarch of the family, elegant, poised, and every bit the controlling figure. She was sharp-eyed and calculating, and Isabella could feel the weight of her scrutiny. "I was just catching up with Isabella Montgomery," Thomas said quickly, his voice tight. "We were reminiscing about old times." Victoria smiled tightly, her gaze flickering between Isabella and her son. "Well, Isabella, it's a pleasure to see you. But I'm afraid you're interrupting. This is an important evening." Isabella met her gaze without hesitation, her smile as icy as the champagne in her glass. "Of course. I wouldn't dream of keeping you from your guests." But as she turned to walk away, Isabella knew that this gala was no longer just a social event. It was the beginning of the end for the Leclercs. They had no idea that the very thing they had built their empire on, their secrets, was about to come crashing down, and Isabella would be the one to make sure it happened. Chapter 7. The atmosphere in the ballroom was electric, a sea of wealth and power. Isabella moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her every step purposeful, her mind laser-focused. She had planted the seeds during her brief exchange with Thomas and Victoria Leclerc. Now it was time for the grand reveal. The world was about to see the Leclerc family for what they truly were. As she walked past clusters of guests, she overheard snippets of conversation, gossip about mergers, private jets, and luxurious vacation homes, but it all felt hollow. These people were intoxicated by their own status, unaware that their idols, the Leclercs, were about to have their world upended. Isabella's eyes swept over the room, searching for the final piece of her plan. She found him standing by the grand staircase, Emmett Leclerc, the youngest son, barely in his 30s, but already carrying himself with the smugness of someone born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was speaking with an influential tech mogul, but his eyes were scanning the room, as if he were bored and detached from it all. That detachment, that arrogance, would be his undoing. Isabella's approach was swift and calculated. She walked toward Emmett with a purpose, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. When he saw her coming, his eyes flickered with recognition before his trademark smirk appeared. He didn't bother to acknowledge her with any formality, as he would with a business associate. Instead, he greeted her with the faintest tilt of his head, like a king allowing a subject to approach. "Isabella Montgomery," Emmett said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I didn't expect you here tonight. I thought you had better taste than to attend an event like this." Isabella didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm, even as she smiled, the warmth in her gaze belying the storm brewing beneath. "I could say the same about you, Emmett. But it seems the Leclercs are always in the thick of things. How's business?" Emmett chuckled, clearly enjoying the banter. "Business is booming. We're just about to sign a deal that will change the game. You wouldn't understand. Not with your small-time ventures." Isabella ignored the insult, keeping her composure. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. The deal." Emmett's smile faltered for a split second, a brief crack in his otherwise perfect facade. "What about it?" Isabella leaned in slightly, her voice low and filled with a quiet intensity. "You're not the only ones with secrets, Emmett. You might want to keep a better eye on your family's business dealings. You're about to become very, very famous. In a way you never imagined. Emmett's smirk returned, though it was laced with an edge of suspicion now. Careful, Isabella. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. My family doesn't take kindly to threats. Isabella's gaze hardened, and she pulled a small, slim folder from her bag. The folder contained key documents, the files Sloane had uncovered. The kind of documents that would make even the most powerful people in the room shudder if they knew what was inside. She slid the folder across the table to Emmett, watching his eyes flicker down to it before returning to her face. It's not a threat, Emmett. It's a promise. You're all about to be exposed for what you really are. Emmett glanced at the folder, but before he could say anything, his eyes widened in recognition. He had seen those documents before. It was impossible to mistake the details, the names, the numbers, the connections to the military contractors. He looked up at Isabella with a mix of anger and disbelief. Where did you get this? Isabella smiled again, though there was no warmth in it now. Does it matter? Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing in the vast ballroom. She could feel Emmett's burning gaze on her back, but she didn't turn around. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The bombshell had been dropped, and it was only a matter of time before it shattered the Leclerc's carefully curated world. The gala's grand chandelier shimmered above the crowd, casting a soft glow over the many high-profile guests. Yet, underneath the surface of this carefully constructed event, tension began to simmer. Isabella's calculated encounter with Emmett hadn't gone unnoticed. As she mingled with other guests, she couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Whispers circulated like wildfire. Some guests shot furtive glances in her direction, others seemed to exchange hurried words. The undercurrent of uncertainty had begun. She wasn't the only one who had noticed. From across the room, she saw Thomas Leclerc's face tense as he spoke with his mother, Victoria. The older woman's posture was rigid, her lips pressed in a thin line. Her eyes scanned the room as though searching for a threat. The Leclercs were nothing if not careful, but Isabella had always known they would be blindsided. The seed had been planted, and now the storm was about to unfold. The gala was the perfect stage for it. People were drunk on champagne, intoxicated by their own sense of importance. They hadn't yet realized that their idols, those who controlled their world, were about to fall from grace in the most spectacular fashion. Isabella moved through the crowd once more, her eyes scanning for the next person to make her move against. This wasn't just about the Leclercs. It was about sending a message. To everyone in the room. To the media. To the public. That no one, no matter how powerful or untouchable, was safe from the consequences of their actions. As the night wore on, Isabella kept a careful eye on the reactions of the people around her. She didn't have to wait long for her next opportunity. Her phone buzzed, and when she checked the message, it was from Sloane. The file is out. It's already circulating. The Leclercs can't stop it now. A cold smile spread across Isabella's face. She had done it. The deal was in jeopardy. The documents had gone public, and soon, the Leclercs would have no way of hiding their involvement in the illegal arms deals, the bribes, the offshore accounts. The walls were closing in on them, and the world would finally see the truth. But this was just the beginning. The Leclercs would be destroyed, yes. But Isabella's revenge wasn't only about their downfall. It was about dismantling everything they had worked so hard to build and making them regret every action they had taken against her. And as the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air around her, Isabella knew one thing for certain. The Leclercs would never recover from this. The end was just the beginning. Chapter 8. The following morning, the news hit like a storm. Isabella sat at the small cafe in her penthouse, a cup of coffee in her hand as she watched the news unfold on the television. The shockwaves were still rippling through the media, and the Leclercs were now the center of a scandal that was too big to ignore. Isabella couldn't help but feel a small, satisfying smile tug at her lips. She had planted the seed, and now, the whole world was watching as the Leclerc empire crumbled. The headlines flashed across the screen. Leclerc family caught in massive military contractor scandal. Offshore accounts and bribes exposed in Leclerc dealings. Leclerc empire on the brink of collapse. The reports were everywhere, detailing the illicit arms deals, the under-the-table exchanges with military contractors, the money laundering schemes, and the ties to corrupt government officials. And in the midst of it all, the name of Isabella Montgomery was now splashed across every article, every broadcast. The world knew who had brought the Leclercs to their knees. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down at the message. It was from Sloan. The media is eating it up. Leclercs are scrambling. They're trying to salvage what's left of their reputation, but it's too late. They're done. Isabella read the message, her mind already turning to the next phase of her plan. The Leclercs were being publicly humiliated, but she needed more than just public disgrace. She wanted their empire shattered completely, their reputation so tarnished that they could never recover. Meanwhile, the Leclercs were in full damage control mode. Isabella could imagine the chaos unfolding inside their corporate offices. Thomas and Emmett were likely trying to contain the fallout, while Victoria would be holding a private meeting with their legal team, making calls to their powerful allies. But nothing would save them. The truth had already been exposed, and the public would demand accountability. The head of the storm, sat Victoria Leclerc, whose impeccable composure was beginning to crack under the pressure. She was the matriarch of the family, the mastermind behind the empire, but even she had underestimated the wrath of a woman seeking revenge. Isabella had played her cards perfectly, baiting them with just enough information to make them think they could cover their tracks. But it had been a trap all along. Isabella needed to make her next move. She had successfully destroyed the Leclerc's public image, but she wouldn't stop there. The real prize was their financial downfall, their lifeblood. To take everything from them, she had to ensure that their assets were frozen, their money was seized, and their influence vanished. The people who had once groveled at the feet of the Leclercs would soon realize they were nothing more than empty promises. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a text from an unexpected source. Damien Blackwood, I see you've made your move. I want in. We finished this together. Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She had known Damien's reputation well before she had ever met him. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had a reputation for vengeance, for getting things done when no one else could. And now, he was offering to join her crusade. She quickly typed back, "You're in. But we move carefully. I've got a few more steps to take, and I need your help." Damien's reply was almost immediate. "Consider it done." Isabella knew she had just gained an ally who could turn the tide in her favor. With Damien's resources and her meticulous planning, the Leclercs wouldn't stand a chance. That evening, Isabella stood in front of her full-length mirror, reviewing the next phase of her plan. She had been gathering intelligence for weeks, taking advantage of every crack in the Leclerc empire, and now it was time to strike again. The world was watching, but Isabella knew that the most dangerous blows were the ones dealt in the shadows. She pulled out the folder from her desk, filled with documents detailing the Leclerc family's hidden assets, shell companies, and off-the-books investments. These were the things they thought no one would ever uncover. She had already set the stage, but now she needed to bring the final curtain down. Her phone rang. It was Victor. "Isabella," he said, his voice low, "we've got a problem. The Leclercs are pushing back. They're reaching out to their contacts in the government, in law enforcement. They're trying to block any attempts to seize their assets. They're fighting back harder than we expected." Isabella's jaw tightened. She had expected resistance, but not like this. The Leclercs had deep roots, and their wealth had bought them access to powerful allies. But this was no longer just about money. It was personal. And when it came to personal stakes, the Leclercs were no match for her. "They'll learn," Isabella said coldly, "that no one gets to destroy me and walk away unscathed." The next morning, Isabella's plan began to unfold with chilling precision. She'd already positioned the right people in the right places. Her contact in the Regulatory Commission had gathered enough evidence to freeze the Leclerc's assets, and another source had provided insider information on their overseas accounts. But now, she had one final card to play. A card that would completely decimate the Leclerc's financial empire. She arranged a meeting with Damien in an upscale hotel suite, the two of them seated across from each other at a polished wood table. He was dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable as always. But even he couldn't hide the interest in his eyes when Isabella laid out her plan. "We have one last thing to take down," Isabella said, her voice steady. "The Leclerc Foundation. It's where they funnel their donations, where they launder money, and where they hide their darkest dealings. We expose that, and the Leclercs will have nowhere left to run." Damien nodded. "And you want me to take the lead on this?" "No," Isabella replied, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We do it together. I'll provide the leverage, and you'll make sure the story reaches the right people. We hit them where it hurts the most." As Damien stood up to leave, Isabella's mind raced with the possibilities. The Leclercs had no idea what was coming. They thought they could fight back, that they could twist the truth to fit their narrative. But Isabella knew the truth was far more powerful than any lie they could construct. The Leclercs were done. Their world was collapsing, and there was nothing they could do to stop it, and Isabella Montgomery would be the one to make sure of it. Chapter 9. The morning after their meeting, the Leclercs were in full crisis mode. Victoria Leclerc had locked herself in her private study for hours, and Thomas was holding emergency meetings with their top legal and PR teams. The world was still buzzing about the scandal, and the media was relentless. Their stock prices were plummeting, and their reputation, carefully crafted over decades, was in ruins. Isabella, on the other hand, watched from a distance, biding her time. She had set her plan in motion, and now it was a waiting game. The pieces were all in place, and the final blow was just a few hours away. She wasn't naive enough to think the Leclercs would give up easily. They had power, influence, and deep pockets, but Isabella had something they didn't: patience, strategy, and a thirst for revenge that ran deeper than anything they could understand. Damien had come through on his end. The Leclerc Foundation was as corrupt as Isabella had suspected. Their so-called charitable efforts had been a cover for a money laundering operation that funneled millions into off-the-books accounts. The foundation was supposed to be a front for good works, but in reality, it was little more than a cash cow for the Leclerc family's dirty dealings. Isabella knew that once the world discovered the foundation's true purpose, the Leclercs would have no place left to hide. They would lose not only their wealth, but their last shred of credibility. There would be no coming back from this. The day unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. As expected, the Leclercs had turned to their usual channels to try to stop the truth from coming out. They had lawyers working overtime to block the release of the information about the foundation, and their PR teams were scrambling to put out fires at every turn. But every attempt to control the narrative was met with failure. The media had already picked up the trail, and there was no stopping the avalanche of information now. Isabella sat in her office, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she monitored the situation. She was in constant contact with her sources. Sloan had secured a press leak to the most influential investigative journalist in the country, and by mid-afternoon, the story would break. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a message from Damien. "It's all set. The leak goes live in an hour. We're about to change everything." Isabella's lips curled into a cold smile. It was happening at precisely 3 p.m. The first article went live. The headline was bold and unmistakable: Leclerc Foundation's hidden agenda, the million-dollar money laundering scheme exposed. The article detailed everything: how the Leclerc Foundation had been a front for illegal activities, how it funneled millions into overseas accounts, how high-ranking members of the Leclerc family had used it to launder money and bribe politicians. The details were damning, and the source was indisputable. The article linked the foundation's operations directly to the family, and it included documents from insiders within the foundation itself, documents that could not be ignored. The response from the Leclercs was immediate, but it was too late. The story spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with outrage, the hashtags #LeclercScandal and #LeclercLies trending worldwide. News outlets were running updates every few minutes, and politicians from both sides of the aisle were calling for investigations into the family's activities. Victoria Leclerc had never been one to lose control. But now, as she sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by her family and their top advisors, the weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. Her usual composure was slipping, the cracks appearing for the first time in decades. "Victoria, we can't let this go any further," Thomas said, his voice tight with panic. "We need to get ahead of this. Call in every favor we have. If we don't stop this now, we lose everything." Victoria looked at her son, her sharp gaze piercing him as she considered his words. The fire in her eyes was still there, but it was tempered by the realization that they had no control over the narrative anymore. The storm had already hit, and there was nothing they could do to calm it. "Where's Emmett?" Victoria snapped, her voice trembling with urgency. "He should be handling this. He was supposed to handle this." "I'm here." Emmett's voice rang out from the doorway. He had just entered the room, his face tight with frustration. He was already holding his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of notifications about the scandal. "This isn't something we can spin, Mother," Emmett said. "We've lost control. The media won't stop. It's all over the news. It's out of our hands." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she turned to face her son. "You're supposed to be the one to clean up this mess, Emmett. What good are you if you can't even do that?" The tension in the room was palpable, and for the first time, Isabella's enemies appeared vulnerable. This wasn't the Leclerc family at their best. This was the Leclercs on the verge of complete destruction. They had underestimated her. They had thought their wealth and influence would shield them. But now, they were on the brink of losing everything. As the evening approached, Isabella prepared for the final phase of her plan. She sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tapping on the wood, thinking about how far she had come. This wasn't just about taking down a corrupt family. This was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her power. The Leclercs had destroyed her once, but now she would be the one to make them pay. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, and the door opened to reveal Damien. He was calm, his usual air of detachment not betraying any sign of the chaos unfolding around them. "It's done," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "The final blow has been delivered. The Leclercs are done." Isabella's heart surged with satisfaction. But she knew the Leclercs were only part of the equation. The last step, taking control of the power they had held for so long, was still ahead. The storm wasn't over, not yet. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of triumph. The end was near, and when it came, the Leclercs would have no one left to turn to. They would be left with nothing but the consequences of their actions, and Isabella Montgomery would finally have the last word. Chapter 10. The following morning, Isabella stood before her mirror, gazing at her reflection. She was dressed in a tailored suit that gave her an air of confidence, power, and control. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully chosen, not just for the meeting she was about to attend, but for the message she wanted to send. She had risen from the ashes of her betrayal, and now she stood on the precipice of complete domination. Today would be the final chapter in the Leclerc saga. The pieces were all in place. The Leclerc foundation had been exposed, their financial web shattered, their political influence dissolved. Now, she would take their empire from them. The day before had been chaotic. The media had consumed every last morsel of the scandal, and the public had been ravenous. The Leclerc's allies in the government were abandoning them, one by one. The family had made countless calls to their trusted connections, but no one was answering anymore. Even the most powerful figures had turned their backs. Today, the last of the Leclerc assets were about to be seized. Isabella arrived at the boardroom of the company that once belonged to the Leclercs. Now, it would belong to her, or at least to her proxy. She had arranged for a public auction of the Leclerc assets, and she had made sure to have the right buyers in place. By the time this meeting was over, the family's entire fortune would be scattered to the wind. As she entered the room, she was met by several key figures: investors, bankers, lawyers, and business magnates who had been eager to profit from the downfall of the Leclercs. These people weren't interested in morality, they only cared about the numbers. And Isabella had made sure to manipulate those numbers until they were on her side. She stood at the head of the long conference table, surveying the room. The eyes of the investors were on her, some with anticipation, others with skepticism. There was power here, but Isabella was the one with control. One of the investors, a man with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, leaned forward. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice respectful but guarded. "You've made a very bold move in taking over the Leclerc assets. I assume you've already made arrangements for the auction." Isabella nodded. "Yes, the assets are ready for auction. The Leclerc family has had its time. Now it's time for the future. And I'm here to ensure that future is secured." The man smirked. "I don't need to remind you that the Leclercs won't go down without a fight. They're not going to simply let you take their legacy from them." Isabella's lips curved into a confident smile. "Oh, I'm not taking it from them. I'm simply making sure that no one will want it once they're done." The investor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak again. Meanwhile, at the Leclerc estate, the family was crumbling. Victoria was pacing her study, furiously dialing numbers on her phone. Her face was pale, a stark contrast to her usual impeccable composure. Emmett sat across from her, his expression just as grim. They had exhausted every option, made every call, and yet the damage was irreversible. Their wealth was disappearing, their reputation tarnished, and there was no one left to turn to. "Where is it all going wrong, Mother?" Emmett asked, his voice strained with frustration. "We've been through worse than this before." Victoria looked at her son, her gaze piercing, but even she could see the cracks in their foundation now. The realization hit her like a cold wave. There would be no more bouncing back. Their empire was done. "We've lost everything," Victoria said quietly. "Isabella has won." The truth stung more than she could bear. She had built this empire with her own hands, but it had all been undone by the woman she had once betrayed so callously. Back in the boardroom, the auction began. The first lot up for bidding was the Leclerc family's international real estate portfolio. One by one, the properties were sold off, each bid rising higher and higher. Isabella watched, a cool smile on her lips. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The Leclercs had amassed wealth for generations, but now it was being stripped away piece by piece. She glanced at the screen that displayed the bids. Each number that flickered on the screen represented a piece of the Leclerc legacy slipping further from their grasp. As the auction continued, she felt the weight of it all. The years of planning, the careful manipulation, the relentless pursuit of revenge. But it wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about reclaiming her power, reclaiming everything the Leclercs had stolen from her, and she had done it all with finesse. The final lot came up, the Leclerc family business. This was the crown jewel, the one thing that had kept them untouchable. The auctioneer opened the bidding, and a tense silence filled the room. Isabella didn't look at the other investors. She knew they would make their moves, but this one was hers to win. A few bids came in, but Isabella didn't hesitate. She raised her paddle, her voice steady as she placed her bid. $2 billion, she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. The room stilled. The auctioneer glanced at the other bidders, but no one moved. Isabella had set the price so high that the others couldn't compete. She had already secured the business in a separate deal. This was just for show. With a final, resounding thud of the gavel, the auctioneer declared, "Sold, to Ms. Isabella Montgomery." The room erupted in murmurs, but Isabella remained composed. She had just secured her place at the top. Later that evening, as the news broke about the auction and the complete collapse of the Leclerc empire, Isabella allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Leclercs had been vanquished, their wealth scattered to the wind, their power stripped away. They had no allies left, no friends, and no place to hide. She was now the one in control. As she stood on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out over the city skyline, a thought crossed her mind. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about taking everything they had and making sure they would never rise again. The Leclercs had destroyed her once. But now, Isabella Montgomery was the one who stood victorious. Epilogue. The final victory months had passed since the auction that decimated the Leclerc empire, but Isabella had not allowed herself the luxury of slowing down. The transition had been swift, and every corner of her new domain was now under her control. The Leclerc family was gone, not just from the boardrooms, but from the very fabric of the society they had once dominated. Their name had become a symbol of corruption, betrayal, and eventual downfall. Isabella, on the other hand, had emerged stronger, her reputation now untouchable. She had proven not only that she could survive betrayal, but that she could thrive in the ruins of her enemies. With the Leclerc assets now under her ownership, she had rebuilt the businesses into something new, more innovative, more transparent, and more powerful than ever before. The media, once so quick to highlight the Leclerc's rise, now focused their cameras on her achievements. She stood in her office, looking out over the city, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling in her chest. It wasn't about the wealth anymore, it was about the legacy. It was about rewriting the story, her story, and making sure it would be told for generations to come. But no victory came without its consequences. Damien entered the office, his usual cool demeanor present, but his eyes betrayed something more. Something thoughtful. He crossed the room and leaned against the desk, glancing out at the view Isabella had come to appreciate in recent months. "You've done it, Isabella," he said, his voice low but filled with admiration. "You've taken everything they had, and you've made it yours." I have to say, watching it all unfold, it was impressive. Isabella smirked, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. It was never just about getting the assets. It was about proving that no one can stand in my way, not even the most powerful family in the country. I've learned the hard way that nothing lasts forever, not even power. Damien paused for a moment before replying. "It's funny. You spent all this time bringing them down, but I can tell it's not about revenge anymore. It's something else. You've changed." Isabella turned to him then, her expression unreadable. "I've always known what I wanted. It was just a matter of taking it." Revenge was the catalyst, but this, she gestured broadly, this is the real victory. Damien studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her pause. "You know, I think that's the most honest thing I've heard you say all along." As the days passed, Isabella's life began to stabilize in ways she hadn't expected. The constant tension and the planning that had consumed her for years had started to fade, leaving behind a sense of accomplishment that was almost peaceful. Almost. She had buried her enemies decisively. But in the process, she had also built something new. And now, she had to decide what to do with it all. Isabella had everything now: power, wealth, influence, and the respect of people who once thought her an afterthought, someone easy to dismiss. But there was something she knew deep down. Her journey hadn't truly ended yet. She wasn't done with her rise. Late one evening, as Isabella was reviewing documents in her office, her phone buzzed with a text message from Sloane. It was brief but potent. "The Leclercs are trying to make a comeback. They've started to regroup in the shadows. They're planning to fight back. This isn't over." Isabella's eyes narrowed. She'd expected something like this. After all, the Leclercs were nothing if not stubborn. But it was no longer about the Leclercs or their failed attempts to regain power. It was about the future and how she would shape it. She stared at the message for a moment before typing her response. "Let them come. It's too late for them. I'm already untouchable." Isabella set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, a sense of finality in her bones. She was untouchable, indeed. The Leclercs had learned the hard way that there was no room for weakness in this world. She had shown them that strength, when wielded with precision, was unstoppable. The city below her seemed to hum with life, its lights twinkling like 1,000 stars scattered across the night sky. Isabella's empire was now a force to be reckoned with, and she was at the center of it all. Her name had become synonymous with power. Her face graced the covers of business magazines, her every move followed by the media. The same people who had once doubted her were now trying to catch up to her pace. They would never succeed. Isabella Montgomery had risen from the ashes of her past and claimed the future as her own, and as for the Leclercs, they would fade into obscurity, their name forgotten as quickly as it had risen. Isabella was the new face of power, and she would make sure no one ever forgot it.